Welcome to this special Tech Captains episode. I'm Ron Dannenberg, and this year with Gareth Thomas, we interviewed 22 individuals working in tech at different levels, for most of them leading in their fields. And we picked some of our favorite answers. We could have picked something from all our interviewees, but the result would have been way too long. So we've picked a few that caught our attention, and both Garrett and I hope that you will enjoy this.
Colin Eberhard of Scott Logic talks about being shaped by early career choices.
I didn't start out in life looking to be a programmer or a computer scientist. I studied physics at university. And the first job that I got out of university was a little bit different. I was a microscope designer. So I was combining mechanical engineering, optical engineering, electronic engineering, various different disciplines. And I guess in terms of things that shaped my career, I think spending some time doing non-software engineering, I think has given me a slightly different perspective than if I'd been a career software engineer. So that was the first job that I had. Although one of the positives of that was it's an interesting discipline. You get to experience so many different things. However, microscope designer, there aren't many places that need microscope
designers. You're the first
designers.
one I've ever met.
Exactly. There were a sum total of 2 companies I could work for in the whole of the UK. And beyond that, there were a few in Germany. And I got to a point in my life where I wanted to live where I wanted to live and then find work in that area, which is why I was reasonably competent, self-taught programmer. I thought, well, that's the obvious career to take. There are software jobs everywhere. And this was even before a lot of remote working was the norm. Pretty much any city you travel to in any country, you can find software engineering work. So I took a choice to move into software, and that's allowed me to stay in the northeast of England rather than living in London. I live by the seaside, so I've picked the place that I want to live, and I've never looked back. The first company I worked for was a company where we were designing medical systems, sort of medical IT systems, which was really good because it meant I went from being a bit of a software hacker on the side to being in an organization where there was quite a rigorous process for software development because the systems we were developing were quite critical. So I was only there for a few years, but I learned a huge amount about the rigor that goes into writing software rather than the hacking that I used to do on the side. And then following that, joined Scott Logic Consultancy, and I've been there for about 16 years now. So that's been a huge part of my career.
Tobias Rijken of Kheiron Medical and how they are fighting cancer with AI.
We are essentially addressing the cancer pathway. And what we want to do is we want to fix cancer with better AI-driven diagnostics. So one of the big problems that we are seeing is that cancer care is actually bottlenecked by diagnostics. It's an information problem. At every stage in the cancer pathway, all the way from detection to diagnosis to treatment planning and treatment, there's what we call an information problem. Either information is inaccurate, or there's missing information, or the information is ambiguous. And that leads to suboptimal decisions of cancer care. This is something that can be solved with AI. So what we are doing is building AI along the cancer pathway to improve the quality of the information at that specific point, whether that's a better diagnosis or more accurate detection. And we sort of longitudinally model how cancer progresses through that pathway so that we can improve cancer care. I mean, that's quite a big vision. But what we did is we started all the way at the beginning of the pathway, which is before you can do anything else, you need to actually detect, is there cancer here, yes or no? So detection is step number 1. And one of the hardest breast cancer detection tasks, but also one of the most established cancer detection tasks, is breast cancer detection. Many Western countries have an established breast cancer screening program. So essentially the task that radiologists need to perform is a mammogram is taken of women within the age group 55 to 70. It sort of depends per country what the window is, but they get every year, 2 years or 3 years, they get a screening mammogram. And the radiologists need to look at it and basically determine, should I call this woman back for further examination? Yes or no. It's a binary task. The problem, however, is that there's a huge shortage of radiologists at the moment. And in the UK, it's even coming to a stage where if we don't solve this crisis, some screening programs will no longer be able to continue. The Royal College of Radiologists has been speaking about a workforce crisis for a number of years now. We simply don't have enough radiologists to do this work. And the way cancer screening works, the gold standard is you always have 2 radiologists looking at every single case, because it's a very hard task. It's very well defined, but still a very hard task. So 2 radiologists look at this independently. When they agree with each other, great, you do whatever they agree on. When they disagree, a 3rd radiologist comes in to arbitrate the case. Now, the interesting thing is this is a screening distribution, which means that roughly 1% of women has cancer. And the vast majority of cases are normal. So in most of the cases, the 2 radiologists actually agree with each other, because those are the easy, normal cases. But you still need 2 radiologists. So what we have developed is MIA, the Mammography Intelligence Assessment. And MIA can essentially perform the task of one of those radiologists. So does exactly the same task. Mammogram comes in. Is there cancer here? Yes or no? And then the workflow doesn't change, because if now you have the radiologist and MIA, if they agree with each other, great, you do whatever they agree on. When they disagree, you still get the arbitrating radiologist. So there's always a human in the loop, but now we can automate all the reads of the second reader. There will be a bit more arbitration, so overall you save roughly 45% of reads. But this is high volume cases. In the UK, we're screening more than 2 million women a year. And we can automate half of the necessary reads here. So that's a bit of the context. This work, we've now started to see real world evidence that we are actually finding more cancers. This was also featured in an article in the New York Times earlier this year on some of the work we've done in Hungary. And now we're rolling this out in the UK. We're currently rolling out in 15 UK screening units, which is, in terms of volume, is roughly 25% of the UK screening volume.
Jan Hollez of Deliverect on the importance of early architecture decisions.
I think that's not that unique for a business, is that we actually focus on big enterprises as well as SMB customers. Most of the time you do one or the other, right? And because of that, like, it's not, we don't just do the big ones like the KFCs, the Burger Kings, or the Taco Bells of this world, but also SMBs, like I think in London you guys will know the Shoom, or even certain dark kitchens. And they each have their own requirements, right? And so for us, because we our software, we really quickly saw that the need was very similar for these bigger players. And it allowed us, without a lot of changes, which you normally need to do for enterprise customers, to immediately have a good fit. But on the other hand, the requirements of enterprise customers relating to security and high availability are, of course, much bigger than what you can expect from SMB customers. So from day one, I focused a lot on making sure that the tech stack we chose was able to comply with those things. And I think, having done it before and having scaled, like, you can't do everything from day one, because that will slow you down. But there are a lot of things when you've made some mistakes and when it wasn't that efficient, that you will focus a lot on. And high availability is one of them. It's one of the reasons I immediately wanted to make sure, we used Docker, we used Kubernetes, and then, I was used to working with AWS, but I thought, Google should be better at this part, or at least more innovative in the space, since they helped the development of it. So that's actually why I chose that on the DevOps side. And from day one, we've also done our infra as code. So it's very easy for us to spin up new environments and to scale them and make sure that everything runs smoothly.
You made an interesting point there, which I often have discussions with people on, which is I think you were sort of saying that at the beginning, obviously you were thinking about high availability, you were looking at these bigger customers, but when you're really small, you have to be realistic about what the threats to the business are. It's probably not the fact that you might not be achieving 4 nines, right? It might be the fact that you might not be able to make payroll in 3 months unless you get another round of funding in. So, you have to focus on what really is important. You could put a huge effort into making it extremely resilient and then run out of money. So,
Yeah, and I think that's maybe also one of the differences between CTOs that or founders as well, and that have been there from the start, because it's ultimately it's not easy. When you're on the tech side, you want to look into the future, and you want to make sure that whatever you build, it will scale, it will still work then. But the trade-offs are always there, right? And it's like you said, if you over emphasize on this too early, then it might be irrelevant. You might not even exist anymore. Like,
exactly.
you need
Yeah.
that right balance. And it's true for tech, but also how you structure your organization. Like, everyone always loves to say we're working agile, but it's very different when you're a team of 10 or you're a team of 500. And I'm a strong believer of having the least amount of structure that you need for that phase, because when you're with 10, you're anyway agile. Even if you never meet, when you sit next to each other, what everyone else is doing. It's very, very easy, and without any processes, you can go very, very quickly. But as you start to have more teams, and as you start to have more offices that are not, so that people are not sitting in the same location, that's when you're just forced to have more structure, so that people aren't doing the same thing over again, or even worse, doing things in a way that's not that compatible with each other. So that's when you need to reinvent yourself and constantly make small changes to make sure that it's still working flawlessly.
Richard Rosenberg of Spendesk on approaching an old problem from a new perspective.
The hardest thing, and I don't think this is necessarily the hardest thing from a technology challenge, but it maybe points back to what I was saying earlier around really thinking about the problems that a human has, and trying to figure out what is the right solution to get that. And so actually trying to, I think the way most, or the traditional way of financial software seems to be designed is they're thinking about it in a way that thinks about the problems of the finance team. And while that is very true, the way the clever thing that I think Spendesk did at the start was to try and solve their problems by I think giving absolute full transparency around all of the data and the processes around how a company spends its money, to try and almost, I guess, empower each employee to manage their own world. I think quite often the processes of a company around how it spends its money can be very complex or even very political. And actually trying to give some transparency to the data, we've seen both from me personally using Spendesk at Spendesk, but from our customers too, that really changes the way that money is spent in a company.
Sue Li of Swipeguide on an unusual career journey to being a CTO.
My tech journey, because I hope that it helps answer maybe some questions that people might be wondering about, what should they do with their lives, what should they go into, and honestly, the truth of it is, I think it really doesn't matter what you pick at first, because life is it's a lifelong journeying experience. And I think for me, when I started out, I was always quite interested in how technology can actually enable creativity. I actually had studied art and political science in college, and I was doing a lot with creative software, the Adobe Creative Cloud. I was really interested in how software actually can help, empower people to create digital experiences. And when I graduated, actually, I joined a Teach for America program, and I found myself actually in a teaching role that was actually helping kids using software, kind of in a very rural area where the income wasn't that high. There wasn't a lot of technology there, and it was so amazing to help kids actually use creative software to create yearbooks, to create newspaper layouts, to design things. I loved the Gifted and Talented program where we used cameras to help kids tell stories. So I was also very, very interested in that, how technology can be a means of creative expression. And of course, naturally, tech products are kind of the ultimate expression of that. You're actually able to then build a service or, something that someone can use in the end. And I think looking back on it, I realize now that my experience in the classroom actually helped me with a lot of my management and leadership skills today, because after you can manage a class of 20 25 teenagers that are all kind of at different levels, all working on different things, all different learning styles, actually then working with adults and even software engineers is a lot easier. So to kind of share a little bit more how I ended up then in tech was, then through that I became very interested in actually designing learning experiences, and I did a master's at the Harvard Graduate School of Education that was about technology and innovation in education. So looking at different ways to design digital learning experiences. This was back in the day when MOOCs were all the rage, and I worked on several projects for global citizenship for kids, at various projects about language learning, for example. And I kind of, and at this time I moved to Berlin and I got into the startup industry, and I thought this was so cool. It was a bunch of 20-year-olds running around with all this VC money, launching companies. And I ended up working for, I was one of the first instructional designers for Career Foundry. They were an online platform to help people learn about UX design and coding. And I thought that was so cool actually to get into this space. So I ended up moving to Amsterdam a few years later, and was the head of product for designing a children's game, and also curriculum for teachers for teaching about programming concepts to kids, and actually found out we had to also teach the teachers also about the programming concepts as well. So I've always been really passionate about the role of technology in education and creativity. And then through that product role, ended up in different product roles, and somewhere down the line also had been learning to code as well on the side. And a few years ago, I found the opportunity at Swipeguide, and I ended up actually just joining as a software developer. And Swipeguide really stood out to me because it was also a platform to help people learn procedures. It was actually designed by our CPO, who has a background in instructional design. The platform is designed in a way to be step-by-step and very easy for people to learn the steps. So I thought that was a very cool product.
Matthew Whitworth of Tallerium on their unusual tech stack.
The back end is an Elixir, and that's a environment that we're very much big fans of. The idea is that the thinking around a lot of conventional architectural approaches is let's have a monolithic backend, and when it gets too big, let's split it out into a whole set of microservices. Elixir, Erlang, and everything based on the Beam VM is very much about message passing. So you still get this sense of having a kind of set of services. Really, in Elixir, they're gen servers, but you're passing messages between them, but you don't have all the problems that a very distributed microservice-based approach does around testing and deployment and things like that. And what we found is keep it monolithic, but monolithic doesn't mean poor design, bad design. It's more about does the environment that you're using, the language you're using, promote good design practices? And hey, when it makes sense, we can pull a service out, put it on another machine, and it's so long as it joins that same cluster. To me, that's the beauty of Erlang. It looks like it's running locally there as well.
Yeah, so I was, because I didn't know much about it. I mean, I knew what Erlang was because that's been around for, I think, since the 80s, right? It's pretty old. It's like Ericsson who developed it originally.
Quite right.
Yeah, so I didn't know much about it. Actually, it was kind of interesting reading up on it, and they were saying obviously you can have thousands of these processes and these threads running that can communicate with each other. How does that work then when you're running in a containerized environment? Does the framework handle that for you? How does that sort of work?
So you lose some of the coolest aspects of it. I mean, things like hot code reloading, and of course that's the basis in the whole public switch telephone network. When's the last time you picked up the phone and the dial tone didn't ring? I suppose that's a rather older example now, but it's this sense of everything else does work though, because really what's happening is it's a distributed cluster, and so long as the nodes can discover each other, then you're kind of good to go. So for example, and there's multiple ways of assembling that cluster, DNS entries, etc. But if you can get that going, then you can really scale horizontally as aggressively as you want, not just vertically on the same machine.
Martin Brunthaler of Adverity on languages versus ecosystem.
We run mostly on Python. That's where we started with data integration. However, we have a very diverse tech stack. The front end is mostly built on TypeScript, React, now Next.js technology. So I think it's pretty modern in these regards. Then we have a part of the platform that still runs on Groovy and Rails.
Wow.
That's something that we still have around. A little bit of Kotlin, but that's kind of the majority at the moment. I'd say 60% is built on Python.
And you mentioned now a few of these, like, modern frameworks, Next.js, etc. But also earlier, just after you mentioned the Greybeard, all the languages like Pascal, etc. that you used to work with. And nowadays, we don't really hear those. So what do you think, like, of younger developers or people getting into the tech world and directly jumping into frameworks? What's your opinion on that?
I think it's hard. Language is not as important as the kind of ecosystem that surrounds it. Hence, Python is very strong because you have a couple of key leader technologies, for example, Django, maybe Celery to be considered as well. We have strong support from companies like Google, who provide native SDKs, etc. So I think what really powers a language, if you would want to say that, is the whole ecosystem and frameworks that you can get, and the support from the community. That said, there's always the coolest kid around. 2 years ago, nobody was talking about TypeScript, and now it's the hottest thing in the JavaScript ecosystem. It could be considered its own language as well, but like what I mean here is things change, and I think the key takeaway is we should embrace that, because even like considering things like GPT, 9 months ago, not many people have been talking about that, and now it's the hottest thing around. And keep an open mind. That's kind of the thing.
Aviv Ben-Yosef on the importance of one-to-ones.
I think that one-on-ones are now more popular or taking as a default for many new managers in tech, which is great, but it didn't used to be the case just a few years ago. And still there are people who think they're doing one-on-ones but aren't really doing one-on-ones. For example, you might have the meeting scheduled on your calendar, but 50% of the times where it pops up, you're like, I think we can skip this one. Or you actually sit down with your employee, but it's not really a one-on-one, and it's more of a tell me what you're working on, and I'm checking up on you and seeing that everything is going correctly. And for me, one-on-ones are one of the main tools that you have as a leader, as a manager, to help your people grow, to make sure that they're on the right track, to provide them with feedback, and to give them space to provide you with feedback. Because after all, this is something that we've learned when it comes to software delivery. We have agile thinking because we've learned that if you do things in smaller increments and you have iterations, it usually is better than doing one huge waterfall project and only learning after 8 months that what we did isn't the right thing. And I think the same thing should apply to one-on-ones. People should constantly get feedback about how they're progressing and what you're expecting. And one of the worst things I see still is that many companies, when they onboard new employees, those employees don't really get any feedback for like the first 3 months. And I say
Yeah.
that that's like the worst idea you can have, because those 3 months, I call them the window of malleability. That's the time where someone is actually most open to getting feedback and changing how they work. Once too much time passes, you lose the new car smell. They get used to how they're doing things. And if after 3-4 months you tell me, hey, this is not actually what we thought, it's like too late. We just wasted so much time. So start providing feedback right off the gate. I think it
and
really helps
and
everyone.
and how the non-manager can use that one-to-one also for their interest and they improve and
Well, that can be difficult because I regularly hear about the quiet engineer, the one who just sits in the one-on-one and responds to what you ask, but they never pose their own questions. And I think that employees definitely should view this as an opportunity, first of all, to provide feedback about, for example, I've been working on this and I feel like we could have been doing this better, or I don't understand why this is so important, or why we prioritize that, or let me know about an idea you have. And if you do that, you really increase your exposure to the organization. And this is, I believe, something that's crucial for real seniority. If you want to become a more senior engineer, it is not plainly about knowing the tech in and out, being the best when it comes to, I don't know, React or whatever. I want you to be the best at understanding your specific company, the product you're working on, because at the end of the day, that's what really matters. We can take the same the same people and put them in different companies, and in one company they would shine and in another they won't, because they're not connected to the product, because they don't understand how to prioritize things. There's a very clear limit to, even if you're working with the best product person in the world, to how much they can provide you with answers, right? And we all know that coding is hundreds of micro decisions every day. So if you have a good context and you use one-on-ones and you use other occasions to learn more about the company and to ask for exposure to other parts of it, you will become a better engineer because you'll make better decisions. And that's really how you accelerate your growth and how fast you gain experience to become more senior, not just, again, for the technical part of it, but for the part that matters for the company. I call this product mastery usually.
So I think, I think one-on-ones are really important. I listened to your podcast. I agree with pretty much everything you said on it. I've managed the largest batch of engineers I managed was about 130, and even when I had 130 engineers, I still made time to have the 15-minute conversation like you talk about with at least a couple of times a year, just as if I was walking up and having a coffee with them. And I think today, because we have teams that are so spread out, a lot of people working from home, it's become even more important, hasn't it? One of the things I did wonder, though, is where do you, if you're sitting there as the CTO or VP of engineering and you've got all of this structure underneath you and you have line managers in there, maybe team leads who have engineers reporting to them, how do you explain to those line managers the context of these one-on-ones? Because I've seen comments where they feel like, as a CTO or whatever, you're doing this to find some information out about them. Do you know what I mean? You're sort of going behind their backs. How would you explain it to someone who's sort of sitting there in the middle of this process where you're going and speaking to people that report to them?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, first of all, everyone should know that this is something that you do regularly, because I've seen, the engineer that gets an invite out of the blue and they're like, oh, am I getting fired, right?
Yeah,
so they need to know
wrong?
that this is something that is just happening regularly, like nothing's wrong. And second, I hope that in many companies, your line managers, for example, have experienced it before because they were already your ICs prior, if they weren't, hired specifically to become managers, and then they experience it themselves. But if they haven't, you should tell them precisely what this is for. Sometimes this is about you getting a vibe of what's happening, not because you're trying to spy on your managers, but because you know that there's value in hearing things from different points of view. So I work with, for example, a single CTO in a company, and we can work together for 6 months. But every few months, I will say I think I would benefit from listening to a conversation or talking to some of their managers, because as no matter how objective you think you are a sole prism into the company, into your team. So even if I talk to the manager a lot, I only see how he sees things. And there's value in listening to others and seeing, oh, maybe there's a communication issue. Maybe people feel more comfortable speaking not to their boss. And that's something that we need to address. And also, this is also about providing them, the ICs, with a clear path to people higher up, that they can feel like they're getting the attention. They can ask questions that maybe don't make sense at the line manager level. And lastly, I just think that this is something that is healthy, right? It is. We just need to talk about, this is what we value as a culture, where people know that not everything has to go through hierarchy and the chain of command. I would rather not get in the, if you're talking to someone every 6 months, I would rather not get them asking for a raise or something out of the blue. But, and I would explain that this is not for that. But I do want to see how people feel about the company. And I usually would ask something like, if you look at the past 6 months, what do you think the trend is? Are things going better? Are they the same? Are there areas where we are now lacking and that we didn't used to? And getting that, crowdsourced data from 170 people has a lot of value.
Yeah, definitely. Krishna Rapuru of Deliveroo are moving into management.
It was not natural for sure. So I didn't even think about coming to management chain or management path. So definitely a couple of leaders, they inspired me when I was in Medidata in my previous role. So I still remember the words they mentioned. So when you are an IC, individual contributor, your impact may be limited, so only a particular area, particular vertical. Whereas if you move to management, so your impact will be wider through your people. You can make a lot of impact, and there is a lot of self satisfaction as well to see your people growing with your guidance and mentorship. That's really inspired me. I was really thought that initially I was like self-doubt, like, is it really for me? Or then they also assured me it's okay, you can try for 6 months. If it's not your thing, you can go back to IC. There was no problem. So that's how I moved to management from IC.
Oh, that's interesting. And do you miss coding or not so much?
Initially, it was a horrible thing for me. Like, at least for 1 year, I struggled to balance like how I can take out my hands from coding. But later I used it. It's not like a drastic move from taking out that experience, but I gradually eventually moved from coding to mainly looking after design and architectural aspects.
Chris Evans of Instant.io tells us their foundation story.
So I joined Monzo back in 2018, I think it was 2017 or 2018. Back when it was relatively early, so it had like a few hundred thousand customers, and so I was responsible for building out like the platform engineering kind of part of the organization, which at the time was me plus I think 3 engineers, so relatively small. We had a few hundred thousand customers. And yeah, over my time there, it grew into like a pretty big, significant kind of part of the organization with like 7 million customers. And sort of along that journey, I sort of picked up responsibility for running all of On-Call for the bank as well. So on-call being those engineers that are responding to things going wrong. That had sort of a natural segue into incident management, which for banks is actually really quite difficult, because there's not just the kind of like, how do we get the technology back and fixed and running, but there's all the sort of regulatory kind of implications of, if customers can't access their money, that kind of thing, that can be pretty painful. So the idea for this originally was sort of came from the pain of having to sort of navigate those incidents with a bunch of engineers. And so what I did at the time was write something that was just, laughably simple. Like the very first version of this was like a Lambda function in AWS that when someone did a / command, it created a channel, and everyone was like, oh my God, this is like 10x better than what we had before. And then like from that point on, it got more and more sort of like, capable. And then I sort of was like, cool, well, it'd be cool if I could store some state with incidents. So introduced like a Django app with a database attachment to it. So we could start to be like, well, we now know things and we can store things about incidents. But that was the sort of like the real where it all came from. The reason I say sort of is because when I was at the company before Monzo, a company called Moo, someone had written a similar thing, which just created a channel and a Google Doc whenever there was an incident. And it worked so well there that sort of like, I guess I could credit it back to there was the real source.
Thiago De Faria on the importance of kindness. You said on your profile, I think you just have one word, which is kindness. And I thought that was quite extraordinary to see that. I wanted to give you a hug, but I can't. Obviously, you're on the other side of the world. It might seem obvious, but why is that the first word that you use? And do you think we need it in tech more so than perhaps other industries?
I'm not sure if we need more in other industries. I think we as humans and work in general. Yeah, we did glorify too much the arrogant asshole that get things done. The Dr. House that treats everyone badly but solves the most complex cases makes for a great TV show, but it makes for a horrible coworker. Yeah. And that kindness of understanding that, hey, Gareth, you're probably having a bad day, so I'm not going to consider what you've said and how you've said like all of this and take this offensively. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. If I'm talking to a third party, to someone that is doing a job with me, well, even if they did something that I don't think it's the best way, I have to realize that they're doing the best with the knowledge that they have. It's quite rare that you work with people that intentionally want to do a bad job or want to take advantage of you. And we shouldn't overstimulate that sense. And how to do that to me is kindness. Act in kindness towards people. Smile, all of it. And that doesn't mean to lower your standards, lower your bars, or to do anything like that. No, it's just treat them how would you like them to treat you. Make them aware.
That's a good saying.
And sometimes over-communicate. Over-communication is perfect. Tell them how you like to do stuff. And then you can try to make the workplace a better place. And hopefully your life will be better. Your family will be better. And that's just the pay it forward kind of stuff. So kindness is important, in my opinion.
Neil Turner of GoCardless on leadership.
I think what it comes down to really is a very clear understanding of what I own the decisions on. People say like, hire great people, get out of their way. No, that's not what I'm there for. I'm hiring great people and I'm directing them on certain things and I'm giving them autonomy on others and holding them accountable and responsible for the outcomes. And the real thing that matters, there's a tendency to think you're done when your tests pass, when your build is green, when you've deployed the software. That's not done. That's an output. What you really need to care about is the outcomes and the impact that the software that you're building has on your customers, on the business, etc. And so in companies that are product focused like we are, it's really important that everyone gets that it's not done until our customers are using it, they give us feedback, when they're delighted with it. So everyone should be thinking about a customer first approach. Even if you're an engineer, you've just joined, you're fixing bugs, you're making a customer's life better, and you need to sort of care about that sort of thing and focus on it just as much as playing with the new latest version of a technology or picking up a new database. They're all useful skills, but the thing that matters, the thing that will make the company valuable is the outputs that we produce and the impact that has.
Thank you everyone for listening, and to all our guests in 2023, a massive thank you for participating. Our audience is growing and growing, and we hope it will get even bigger next year with a few guests in preparation that I'm sure you will love. So Garrett and I are looking forward to see you next year. Bye-bye.